Jack the Ripper, one of the world's most famous and intriguing serial killers, but who was he? What would happen if the horrific crimes he committed in 1888 happened in modern day? Let's find out in Jack the Ripper, A Murder by Comparison. Let's start with the lives he took, best known as the Canonical Five. Mary Nichols was the first of the Canonical Five. She was found at around 3:40 a.m. on August the 31st by a carter named Charles Cross. He was walking along Bucks Row, now called Durward Street, on his way to work when he saw what looked like a piece of tarpaulin, but on closer inspection he found that it was a woman's body. A fellow carter called Robert Paul also came to investigate. Cross felt the woman's hands. They were cold, but her chest still looked like it had movement. They decided to leave her and tell the first police officer they saw of their findings. Annie Chapman was the second of the victims. She was found a little before 6 a.m. on the 8th of September. A resident of 29 Hanbury Street came downstairs and walked down a narrow passageway before finding a scene of pure horror. Her head was turned towards the house, and her clothes had been pulled up above her waist. Her face and hands were covered in blood. Police were then sent for. This is a quote from Dr. Bagster Phillips. "The body was terribly mutilated. The stiffness of the limbs was not marked, but was evidently commencing." Elizabeth Stride was found at Dutfield's Yard, now known as Henriques Street, on the 27th of November. She made her living as a cleaner and as a prostitute. Her body was found by Louis Daimschutz, the steward of the International Working Men's Educational Club. As he turned his pony and cart back to the yard, his pony refused to go any further. Daimschutz saw a dark form laying on the ground. He took his whip and attempted to lift it. He then took a match and looked at her by the light. Thinking it might be his wife, he went into the club by the side entrance, and finding his wife safe, told several club members, "There's a woman lying in the yard, but I cannot say whether she is drunk or dead." Catherine Eddowes, the fourth canonical victim. She was killed on the 30th of September in Mitre Square. At around 1:44 a.m, P.C. Watkins turned out of Leadenhall Street, strolled along Mitre Street and veered right into Mitre Square. Almost immediately he saw a sight that sent him reeling back in horror. Eddowes was found in a pool of her own blood with her clothes thrown above her waist. This is a quote from Watkins to a known retired police officer. "For God's sake, mate," cried Watkins, "come to my assistance. Here is another woman cut to pieces." Mary Kelly is the final canonical victim. She was also the youngest of the victims. She appears to have been well liked in the area. Mary turned to prostitution when Joseph Barnett, the man she was living with, had financial struggles and couldn't support them both. McCarthy sent Thomas Bauer round to 13 Miller's Court to collect Mary Kelly's overdue rent. He got no reply when he knocked on the door, so he went round to the window and saw her horribly mutilated body lying on the bed. So those were the victims, but what if those crimes were to happen today?
Okay, so my name is Helen Green and I'm Associate Head of Department for Forensic Analytical and Chemical Sciences. I've been working at the university now for 15 years. Before that I was a DNA expert working for the Forensic Science Service, so my background is in genetics and DNA profiling.
Okay, well, yeah, my name's Richard Jones. I currently run the Jack the Ripper tour in London, or should I say walk the Jack the Ripper tour in London. And my background is that I'm a Blue Badge guide, which is a qualified London guide, but also I've written 3 books on Jack the Ripper and 18 books on myths, legends and history of Britain and Ireland as well.
So there's quite a lot of people involved in a modern crime scene investigation. Usually the first people on site are the police officers, so they turn up and make sure that the scene is secured. The next people to arrive are the crime scene investigators, and these usually turn up, usually 1 or 2 individuals depending on the severity of the case, and they would probably wear a full, what we call personal protective equipment or PPE, which is a full scene suit, shoe covers. They'd usually double glove and wear a mask, and they'd have some kit that they would put up in a tent outside the crime scene so that there would be no chance of contamination within and out of the crime scene as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it that the police did, in certain aspects of the investigation, they mishandled it, and obviously they were hampered. They didn't have the things we have today. There was no fingerprinting, although it was around, it wasn't an established police procedure and wasn't used. Forensics weren't around, DNA testing wasn't around. I think would be a problem today as well, is that he wasn't leaving any clues, so there was nothing for them to go on. A lot of people say, well, today if we had DNA, we'd catch him with DNA. But the point about DNA is, DNA on the whole isn't used to catch criminals. In fact, it's often it's more used to rule people out as being the perpetrator of a particular crime. So in that respect, and of course the other big point is that they would have to have that person's DNA on record if they were going to make the comparison and say, well, that's your DNA, we've got you at the scene of the crime. And of course, if that isn't left behind, then they're going to have exactly the same problems today that they have then, in that they haven't got anything to go on. And if the police haven't got anything to go on, these are the most difficult crimes to solve, because the majority of murder cases, the victim knows the murderer, and so people look for who did it, who had the motive, who did they know. Because with these type of killings, there's no connection between the victim and the murderer. They're opportunists. They meet their victim, they murder the victim, and then they disappear. And even today, there's lots of murderers out there who haven't been caught. There's murders that haven't been solved even today. And I think, yes, maybe we'd have the CCTV that will pick him up. But aside from that, I think unless the police got a lucky break, which they didn't in 1888, and if they didn't get that lucky break today, they'd be in exactly the same position as the police were in 1888.
So around about the 1800s, there wouldn't really be much forensic science in terms of fingerprinting and footwear, looking at footwear, and there would definitely be no kind of tracing of DNA. The other main difference would be that there'd be no personal protective equipment, so most of the people that turned up at crime scenes would be police officers, and they would just have their normal uniforms on, so they wouldn't have any gloves or any masks, so there was a high chance of contamination at the scenes from police officers. So around about the turn of the 19th century would be the introduction of fingerprinting, which would be a massive change in terms of forensic science. Still to this day, it's a sort of 118 years later, they still haven't found two individuals that share fingerprints that are exactly the same. The other main change is that we wear lots of protective equipment now, so that we know that we're not contaminating the scene with ourselves or our fingerprints or our DNA. There's also lots of regulations that have been brought in within the last 10 years to regulate scene processing, so there's lots of procedures in place now and lots of standards that have to be met, which have been introduced by the forensic regulator. So it depends on the circumstances and the environment that the body's in. So if it's in a nice warm office like my office, then not very much would happen within that time. If it was outside, the body would cool a lot quicker. And again, if it was in a warmer, temperate region, the body would decompose a lot quicker, but within half an hour, not really much would change to the body, so the body would still be quite warm, and there wouldn't be very much sort of decomposition within that time. It usually takes between 2 or 3 hours for the body to start to cool completely. I think that the forensic profiler would definitely be able to put link the crimes together because of the MO or modus operandi that the individual worked within. But within half an hour of the crime scene, the crime actually occurring, and people actually finding the bodies, there'd be lots of information that you could find. There'd be transfer of hairs and fibres, there'd be DNA, there'd be fingerprinting, there'd be footwear, so there'd be lots of evidence that would be left at the scene. It's very difficult for an individual to carry out any sort of crime these days without being caught.
If they did stop it, they stopped for a reason, and there's only a handful of possible reasons. One is that something happened to the killer after the last murder, that was Mary Kelly, on the 9th of November 1888. That something could have been that he died, so he died by his own hand. He might have died of natural causes. The other possibility is he was put into a mental asylum by his family, and they kept quiet about who he was. That's a possibility. Another possibility is he went somewhere else and continued killing. That's unlikely because these murders were reported all over the world, and there's no way it would have happened somewhere else. And in fact, you can read the newspaper reports from 1889 when there's murders in Jamaica, murders in America, murders in France, murders in Germany, and they're all saying, oh, it's this Jack Rip, has he come to this area? So that's probably unlikely. Of course, the other possibility is that the police did catch him. They caught him for a completely unrelated offence, had him in custody, sent him to prison, and they just didn't realise who they'd caught.
I think in 1888, there was no real photography. Most of if you look at the newspaper cuttings of the Jack the Ripper, it was all people that turned up and actually did drawings of the scene. So I think that there was a lack of kind of documentation and procedure back then, because not very much was known about forensic science back in those days. There wasn't even fingerprinting. So I think the only thing that was used then was kind of biometrics, and if you haven't got an individual, then it'd be very difficult to use biometrics.
I think we would. I think we would catch him. I don't think we would catch him for the obvious reasons that people think, oh, we've got DNA, we've got this, we've got that. I just think that it would be more difficult now. The point about Whitechapel at the time was it was a teeming mass of humanity, and it was a big A, immigrant population, B, it was also a very big criminal population as well. And it was made up of narrow, dark alleyways that were unlit at night, and I think they helped him. And I think today with our street lighting, and obviously we've got the police have more knowledge now about tracking these people down, and I think people today are more willing to come forward and say, that person I know is Jack the Ripper, and I think we know more about the psychology of a serial killer today as well. So I think for those reasons we will catch. I'm almost certain we would catch him today if he committed his murders in a similar sort of small area. If, as with so many American serial killers today, he spread his route out around lots of different areas and spread across the country, then probably not. For the same, if he doesn't leave us any clues.